Our top five favorite books. You want to start off this one?
Okay, yeah, sure. For horror books and everything,
Yeah.
I have a lot of Stephen King stuff, so that's just the way it goes for me, unfortunately. But so the one I really liked was Needful Things. That I'll put that one on number five. And if you ever watch the movie, it's a really good movie. I highly recommend it. But read the book too, and it's kind of cool if you take notes in a way. And I know it's kind of I don't know if it's like lame or not if you think about that, but if you take notes and keep track of who's like double crossing who,
hmm
it's just insane. And it gets in so much more detail in the book, and it's just so jacked up. But that was such a good freaking book when it describes like even like the cars and stuff he described. So in the book, all you see in the movie is like a black Buick drive through. It's real ominous. In the
Yeah.
book, Leland Gaunt drives something called a Tucker Talisman,
hmm
and it was a one-off of something called a Tucker Torpedo. I don't know if you've ever seen those cars.
But that's kind of funny that he drove a Talisman,
Hmm.
and that's kind of sort of what the movie is about.
Yeah,
It's kind of like foreshadowing
yeah, it's kind of
to
neat.
an
You start
extent.
looking into it. It's like, oh man, it's kind of creepy as shit. Like if, and that's what's cool about it. So you take little notes and you even reread it and realize, oh yeah, this does kind of foreshadow that. Or what's really cool too about that book and a lot of Stephen King's work. So I like his work. I hate him as a person.
Yeah.
The guy's politics are fucking stupid, and he just needs to shut the hell up. But I
Agree.
like his books,
hmm
and that's the only thing that bums me out about him. But still, back to talking about the book. So there's reference in Needful Things to Cujo and
Really?
stuff like that. Yeah, and
Okay.
there's references here and there in other books. The same thing. You start reading the books and you start finding references to, hey, that book actually links to Christine. That book links to Cujo, and
Because
so on
what
and
does
so
it
forth.
link to? Because I know there's what does
Uh,
isn't the Dark Tower?
yeah, Dark
Church
Tower.
Dark Tower. Yeah.
So they say Pennywise the Clown is the same as the Crimson King, and I can't remember if it's just in the book or if it was actually in the very first It, the one with Tim Curry, if there was a painting of the eye that says "All Hail the Crimson King" behind the sign of Derry. I can't remember if that was a thing or not. For
It
some
might,
reason, I keep thinking it was.
I think it was.
So that was another like it's just a nod to like the Dark Tower series. Well, the Dark Tower, if you look into that, Jesus, like that's linked into a whole bunch of different books. Salem's Lot, The Talisman, Needful Things, I'd imagine, The Stand, all that stuff's all intertwined in that universe. So
Yeah, I
that
definitely have
Needful
to read
Things would be
that.
my fifth. It's good.
My fifth, I don't know if you've ever heard of it before. It's called In a Dark, Dark Room. And some of my books are children's books, so
That's
prepare
fine.
for it. But that's one thing I always like to seek out dark things, even as a kid. And that was one of the first things I came across was In a Dark, Dark Room. And I used to get it on book and tape, and the you could hear that on YouTube now. Go look up Dark in a Dark, Dark Room. And that guy's voice, the guy who narrated it, is he just did such a good job. But if you go through one of the most memorable stories is The Ribbon. And in The Ribbon, there's young couple and they meet each other and they show their progression for life through life. And in the premise of the story is she's wearing a ribbon around her neck and he wants to find out, why do you keep on wearing this ribbon? He asks like over the whole lifetime up until the end where she's dying in bed and you it's finally revealed that the ribbon is actually keeping on her head and her head
Okay.
falls off at the end of the story. And just listening to that as I could have been like 5 years old and I was like so impressed by that story and the way it was narrated. I was like, man, this is so good. So In a Dark, Dark Room, it's it could have been higher, but there's stuff that's better. Definitely.
It's pretty cool. I'm seeing the artwork and everything, and it looks familiar. I'm
hmm
definitely gonna have to listen to those. That's cool.
Yeah, the way it was drawn, it was just great. Just everything about it was just so good to me as a kid.
Oh, so that just brought me back to the Scholastic Book Fair and like books like that.
Yeah, if you, I I know my kids went through it, but I don't think it was to an extent that it was maybe when you and I were kids, where it was just such a fun thing, and like you would get your books and like you just have them in hand. It just felt so good. It's just a good feeling when you were a kid and you got Scholastic after ordering
Yeah.
books. So that was a fun element of the past. What's your number four?
So I have to change it now because you just reminded me of those, and I had to look up the artwork. So, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. We found it again, and I bought like all three of them because there's like three volumes of them. And I remember, I don't know if you've seen the book, but it has like a creepy clown on it, like on the front page, like smoking a pipe.
No, I don't think I've seen
But
it.
oh, so they made a movie about it. Like they made like a whole series on it. It was pretty good. But the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, I remember it was a Scholastic Book Fair. Like I don't know if it was exclusive or just like a special. It was one of those best-selling books. But the
Mhm.
artwork in it was the illustrations was so dark and just creepy, and I really
Wait a
liked them.
minute. Uh, you're talking about Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark?
Yeah, Scary Stories to
Okay.
Tell in the Dark.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I do remember exactly that. Yeah, the drawings in them. I don't know if you've seen the movie, have you?
Yeah, I watched the movie.
Man, I love the movie. Guillermo del
Yeah,
Toro did such a good job, and the acting in that, because nowadays I think the acting is just so subpar, but the acting in that movie is just so good.
yeah. So man, that was just a good one to have. Like it was cool because once again, like you had the stories, but then the illustrations were just
Yeah,
creepy as
great.
shit. And man, I loved them. They were great. Good artwork.
Yeah, and
That
I'm
would be
pretty
one.
sure they also had that on book and tape, and you could look that up. Yeah, they do. Look
Yeah,
it
they
up
do.
on YouTube, and the voice actor on that is just great too.
Yeah, I think the voice actor is George S. Irving, and
Mhm.
he's good.
Yeah, very good. For that was a good one. I was gonna I'm now gonna put that as my arm. I totally blanked that out. Forgot about Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. My number four is America's Very Own Monsters, and I'll show you the book right here. And I tried to figure this out. It bothered me for years and years because I always remembered. I try to get it out of the glare.
Nice.
I tried to remember throughout the years up until last year when I finally got it a certain part of this book, and I was like, man, I got to figure out which book this was. And I would look up horror books, and I would never find it. And finally, I found it. And what we used to haunt me as a kid was, let me find it real quick, a story about the Goat Man. And I happened to find a copy that was like in use in the library. So it has an old
Nice.
library card and everything. And here it is. Like here's the beginning where it says the goat man is here. But it tells a story about the goat man and how it comes with a battle axe sometime and
Oh wow,
it attacks cars. Let me get this in the right position. But
that's
this
cool.
is something that I always remembered and it was haunting as a kid. And I always think about reading that story and like what if that happens at night? I would always think that as a kid, like if the goat man comes and runs and beats on the car, like and tries to get me or something. But man, I'm so happy that I finally found this book.
America's Very Own Monsters. Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
that's
And
my
that was that basically just almost like a lore book in a way, like
no, it's
monsters
supposed
we
to be
have in the
like true
U.S.
stories that people experience. Yeah,
Oh,
it
that's
has
cool.
it so every 2 or 3 pages it tells a different story. So it tells like there's another one with the swamp creatures and there's like monsters like this, but there's
Oh, that's cool.
it's like real life experiences of what people seen. And there's also the Mothman, and there's the Drover demon. I don't know if you ever heard about that before, but it's yeah, it's
I
like
think I have.
actual stuff that people experience. Bigfoot and everything. So, what's your number four?
So there was a book that my parents had. I have to find the name of it real quick. Um, but it was one of those series books, so it had like mythical creatures, those vampires, zombies, ghosts, dragons, things like that. I
Hmm.
gotta find the name of it. If I can find a picture of it, I could show you. But there was one on there that was there was two of them. One was vampires and one was ghosts. So this is a twofer. But those were so cool because once again, it had ghost stories and stuff. And I remember like the artwork in there was just really cool. So they were the story. One of the stories I had was of the Red Tower, the Bloody Red Tower, where King Henry would behead his wives. You know, so I had the story of that, and she's supposed to roam the castle and stuff with no head, but it had like a disembodied picture of her without a head, like holding a
Hmm.
head basically in a basket, and it was just creepy. But there was always some really cool stories in those, and the vampire one and the ghost one were the two some of the best. They were awesome. Yeah, I did still have one. I still have the ghost one. Was one I didn't get rid of. It's really beat up though, but this was it.
Okay.
Yeah.
What year is that from?
Oh geez, let me see. But it's called the Enchanted World was the series these were from, and it was a whole entire section of them. And this was from Time Life Books, Alexandria, Virginia. But like, you can like look at some of the artwork here. I can show you some if I can.
Okay. Is that the same, like the same artwork throughout the book? That's
Yeah,
pretty cool.
and it's just a bunch of different types of stories, and like they even did different ones. So they even had like Japanese ghost stories, which was pretty cool because you get like lore of Japanese ghosts. And it just basically explains ghosts even like around the world.
So it's like true life stories of what people experience.
Yeah, illustrations in these books were so good. Like if you could ever find them, I'd highly like this one. One of the creepiest freaking little bastards I've ever seen.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I really like the art.
Yeah. Oh, there's the
The beheading.
beheading. Yeah. And here's like the Japanese artwork. They even did that one too. So they're doing the Japanese ghosts, wife's revenge.
That's pretty cool. And it kind of looks 3D the way that the one is drawn.
So it was really cool, man. Like just the different things that they had in here. Even this, like this was cool. It was even like one of the page turning, just an actual hand turning the page,
That's awesome.
popping out. Yeah.
So my number three, and it made me think because I had a different position. So for this one, but I'll make that as an honorable mention because it's only a certain element to it in which we previously talked about. So my number three would be the Silmarillion from Tolkien. And the reason that I picked that is because the whole story around it is Melkor, and it tells the whole story of Melkor and how dark his world was and the monsters he produced and his kingdom of Angband and Ungoliant, the giant spider, and it was the only thing that he feared. That's how terrible the spider was, and the way that the world is. And I wish someone would do this, like Guillermo del Toro would do. Silmarillion would just be perfect. And the way that the story is, it talks about it's basically biblical, the way that it's set out. So it's kind of tough to get through, but once you get to the end of that, where this person begot this person and Alfs and all this, and it talks about the lights. So there basically was no sun. So there was lights on a pole, basically, just how to describe it. And Melkor destroyed those, and then he eventually stills the Silmarillions, which were the power or the light of the world. That's just the whole story of it up until where they put him in the void, which eventually happens to Melkor, and then it goes into the story of Sauron and how I don't know if he was like a vampire, I think it described him as for Melkor, but he was like his lieutenant and he eventually made the rings and all that. So it talks about the intro to Lord of the Rings before everything happened, The Hobbit and all that. So that's just the horror element to Melkor, and he was just such a good villain when you get to that part.
That's pretty cool. I've heard the same, like how you said, it's hard to get through because it's like
Hmm.
reading the Bible, well, basically like all of Tolkien's work,
Yeah,
history explained and everything. I've heard that before, like even from my dad, because he was a big Tolkien fan. And we actually, that's the reason why I kind of started reading too a little bit better was my grades were shitty when I was in school, and he set me down every day during the summer, and we read The Hobbit together,
hmm.
and then we started going into the Lord of the Rings, and it wasn't until middle school when I started actually getting into books a little more.
Yeah,
But yeah, I remember hearing that from him too. It's a hard read, but it's cool because of all the history based, like where everything came from, where the orcs came from, where
yeah,
elves came from, dwarves. I
yes.
love stuff like that where like if you like now as an adult I can appreciate that stuff way more because you get to learn the history of what happened,
Hmm.
like why Middle Earth's the way it is and where all these people have come from, why there's only so many wizards left.
Just the way that, my opinion, that Peter Jackson just ruined The Hobbit. And the best version, if you want to see movie or TV show or cartoon, is the cartoon from, I think it's like 77 or 78.
Yeah.
The way that it's
Oh
drawn
God.
is just so
They
good.
were so good. Yeah.
And it gets to the point it follows the actual book and it gets to the end instead of having like four movies that are unnecessary. They could have just wrapped that up movie in like 3 hours and been done.
So there's a song I always play every once in a while when I'm running and stuff, and I
Mhm.
think it's from The Lord of the Rings, but it's the golems or the orcs going through Mordor. Where there's a whip, there's a way. If you
When
remember
there's
that
a way,
song,
there's a way.
yeah, they're singing that song like we don't want to go to war today.
Okay.
If you could find that and clip that, it's pretty funny. But that right there is like one of those motivational songs. You can run to that song because it's a Jody drill, is what it is. So
Yeah.
it's one of those formation drill songs. But if I would have known that, like if I would have remembered it when we were in like ROTC and doing stuff, I would have made that Jody drill. We would have sang that fucking song
That would have been
because
funny.
it's just funny. Number two would probably be just the Dark Tower collection, the 1 through 7 that Stephen
Mhm.
King wrote. And it's not really like horror based per se, but it intertwines a lot of Stephen King's world. And that was one of the first books that I actually got in trouble for reading in school because I wasn't reading their stupid books, I was reading mine.
Yeah.
So I'd sit there and like I never understood that. Like, how can an English teacher get mad at me for not reading her book but still reading a book?
Yeah.
I'm reading still. Shouldn't you be happy I'm reading?
Yeah.
So I remember reading that through high school, and me and my dad were reading like at like parallel. Like he was such a faster reader than me though, so he'd get ahead of me. But we were sitting there waiting, and I remember getting all those books. The 1 year I get books for Christmas, I'm actually really happy because it's the whole series again. The ones I'm missing, but like one of my favorite books in that whole entire deal, and I even got on audio because I liked it so much, was Wizard in Glass. And Wizard in Glass was just done so well. I liked that book because it explains Roland's past, like when he first becomes a gunslinger
Hmm.
and like his first love and just all the stuff that happened to him. And it was such a good freaking book, a good series, and like where you want to read more on what's happening. I wish Stephen King would have wrote more on what happened in Roland's life, like between that time period and on when he's actually looking for the Dark Tower,
Yeah.
because it was good, and it was just one of those deals where it used to make me laugh because all my friends were reading Harry Potter.
And
All
you're reading
Jess is a
Dark
big
Tower.
nerd,
Yeah.
and I was reading Dark Tower. So I was always saying, I'm reading the Dark Tower. I'm not reading your Harry Potter stuff. My wife has every Harry Potter book they've ever made.
Yeah.
I have every Dark Tower thing they've ever made. So yeah, that was just such a really good, compelling story, and I like just the way he made that world, and even put himself in the world. How arrogant that is, but even like by him putting. Did you ever read any of them?
No.
So even when Stephen King puts himself in the world, he comes off as like a prick and like just a little asshole. And you fucking hate him in the book because like he's writing this whole story about Roland, and Roland's like the epitome of cowboy and old knight. So he's like Clint Eastwood, you know, and
Yeah.
Knights of the Round Table. That's essentially how you look at Roland, you know. And man, like the movie sucked compared to the books. It was just
Yeah.
a bummer.
Yeah, that's what
But
everyone says I've heard say about Dark Tower, who likes the Dark
yeah,
Tower books.
it was too bad too because you would think that Matthew McConaughey would he plays a pretty good villain
Hmm.
and he would play the Man in Black really well if they would have just did it justice. I don't even give a shit about Idris Elba playing Roland. You know, to me it's it kind of sucks, but you know, um, artistic creativity and all that. I guess
Yeah.
I could live through him not being the way he should be in the book
I
if they
don't
just would have did it better.
yeah, I don't think anyone who likes books will be ever satisfied with the movies.
No, I'm
It's just the
with
way
that
it
too.
is. So, my number two is a graphic novel. It's Alien Labyrinth. It's from Dark Horse Comics. What the story is a scientist, and it talks about how he was younger and he was traveling to different solar or systems in space with his family, and they crash landed on this planet where the aliens are. There's an alien hive, and in the alien hive, they're unable to produce correctly. So the aliens are recovering human bodies and they have some type of sickness. So they're unable to make alien drones. So every time that someone's born, they come out deformed or they're just like stillbirths. And the horror aspect of that is that his family is killed, he's captured, and the way that they force feed him because he comes part of the hive and he eventually has one in his chest. So he eventually escapes. I'll just, if anyone has never read it, I'll leave that to it. He eventually escapes, becomes a scientist for the corporation, and he has aliens that he's raising and training and seeing how they function. So that he's just telling the story of what happened to him and what got him there. So there's a second element to where he's doing tests on an actual alien on a base. If there was a perfect alien movie, that would be Aliens Labyrinth, but it's so gruesome they'll never make it.
Usually
Honorable
we just
mentions.
so it would be like some of the other Stephen King books, like Christine. I like Christine. That was a good one because of just so the book was so much different than the actual movie, and I like the movie. I like the movie just because it was just to me, it's one of those timeless movies, classics. I love
Mhm.
the car. I love everything about that. I love the fact the car, plays its music like to kind of compliment Artie, you know, and then that just like relationship with the car. But in the book, it's so much more detailed and it's so much different. Where like he's actually being possessed by a ghost that's in
Mhm.
the car, the previous owner, and he's picking up the mannerisms and the language of that guy, calling people shitters and getting the hunch from the spine problems. Everything's just compounding to the point where it's just crazy. That's an honorable mention for me. I like that. Another one, I was gonna put this as my number ones, but these ones are probably honorable mentions just because these are the creepiest freaking books I have ever read in my life.
Mhm.
So they're in there for creepy books as well. I'd have to go like Hellbound Heart, Clive Barker, Nightbreed, I think is one. Like it's a graphic novel. That was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Those were neat. And the graphic novels were just neat. Then Judge Dredd, Judge Death, all the Judge Dredd Death series ones. That was cool. I had that graphic novel as well. It'll probably be honorable mentions for me.
Okay. Mine, we previously talked about is just the communion book and the picture itself on the book. I couldn't really say because I know we both heard the story of Whitley Schreiber, and what happens to him, but
Mhm.
it's just more or less the cover to that book and how my blood ran cold when I first seen that picture of the alien on the cover. Another one, and what I recommend to you, because I know you know nothing about it, is Junji Ito and his books and his art is, and he's a Japanese artist, and we have English translated books, and they have a series now. They had original series on Netflix, and it took place, or it was stories from the book, and then there was a second one that was recent, and then there's a new one. It's Uzumaki, which is spirals in Japanese, and that series, it's black and white, like the original books, is has been amazing so far. They're on episode 3, but it exactly follows the books, and I watch it in Japanese language instead of English, and it's I don't know what it is, but it puts you more in the element of horror when you watch it in the Japanese language and with subtitles rather than the English version. I like it a lot better just with subtitles. But the art from that, and if you actually lived in the world of Junji Ito, would be terrifying because I think about that all the time. Like you're in this city where the spiral shit is going on, but if you were to go out of that, there's so much horrible shit that's going on in the world. I would hate to live in the world of Junji Ito, but it's so horrific. I mean, I can't believe I didn't put his books as
That's
my
one of his
places,
shirts.
but you need to look them up and read them. Man, the artwork to the stories are just phenomenal, just so good. What's your number one?
So number one for me is have to go classics, and it's got to be just Edgar Allan Poe's just series and stuff. I do
Mhm.
have another honorable mention. I do have to show you, and I forgot to grab it. Edgar Allan Poe's stuff was always. I remember reading the poems and everything. The Raven, El Dorado, Annabelle Lee, The Pit and the Pendulum, and all that stuff was for me was just iconic, and it just kind of got me into horror to begin with, as far as literature was concerned.
Yeah,
And I always Masquerade of the Red Death. I could just go on and on, but he's just one of the great American horror novelists, and people should read it. I mean, it's good stuff, but he's basically inspired
Telltale
everybody
Heart.
on Telltale Heart, yeah, and that stuff. Like it's once again, it just inspired so many other authors.
And getting to my number one is I'll take it out of the cellophane. My favorite childhood book, Frankenstein moved in on the fourth floor.
Nice.
And it follows two brothers that move in to a complex with their mother, and they believe a certain guy whose name is Frank is Frankenstein, and he's actually doing the things that Frankenstein is doing, like the doctor, but specifically the monster. And man, it's the artwork that really absorbed me
That's
into the
good
book
artwork.
also, and just the general story of it. And you eventually are left with, was this guy really Frankenstein? But it just follows how they're trying to figure out and what they run into in their encounters with the guy named Frank. And it's just so good, and I still love it to this day. So if you haven't read it, definitely go out and
Cool. I'll
read
have to check that out. There's certain
it.
books like that I have to get, like just to have. Just I like how you still have that in cellophane. Now you ruin the value by taking it out and showing us. Appreciate
Oh,
it.
I know. It went down by $10, so it's now worth 20.
Yeah.